One, two, three, four.
Hello, you're listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. We are a general interest independent bookstore located in the Los Feliz neighborhood of Los Angeles, California. This year, because of the coronavirus pandemic, we've had to close our store and cancel in-person events. But Skylight is your neighborhood bookstore, and we are finding ways to create community even while we're far apart. In the coming weeks, we'll be putting out lots of new audio content to help you discover new books, connect with authors, and check in with your favorite booksellers. To learn more about how you can help keep Skylight alive, please visit our website at skylightbooks.com or check out our social media accounts on Twitter and Instagram. You can subscribe to the podcast on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Thank you for listening and enjoy.
I'm here with Kathryn Scanlan. We're discussing her new book, The Dominant Animal, which came out on April 7th, pretty new, book of stories. And maybe I can just start by asking you, what holds these stories together for you? What made you decide to put them together here?
Well, the stories that are in the book I've been writing since like 2008 was when I wrote the first story that is in the book. And I wrote other stories between that time and now that didn't make it into the book. But I would say most of the majority of the things that I've written over that time are collected here. And
well,
I
and
think,
you have go ahead. Sorry.
No, you go ahead.
Well, I mean, one thing I was going to say is I think that one thing that holds them together is style. That there's always a real concern and interest in language and in how humans use language to kind of communicate with other humans or to fail to communicate with other humans and with the world at large.
Yeah, I think that I also feel that way. And I think it was also just sort of surprising to see, especially since I had been writing this book for so long, how sort of like cohesive it ended up being. Also like maybe slightly unsettling just to see the reoccurrence of, one's preoccupations, I guess. But
yeah, I mean, it does feel to me like there is a cohesiveness to the collection, which is a nice thing. The other thing you do, I think, is really interesting about this collection is that you group stories. So there's like 8 sets of 5 stories each. And I wanted to just ask about that. Are those units meant to group similar stories or talk to one another, or are they kind of mini books or chapters? Or how did you think about that when you were putting it together?
Yeah, that happened, late in the game when I was just trying to figure out what order to put the stories in, and I was having a really hard time with it, and I thought about just doing it sort of by chance, just kind of throwing the title into a hat or something and shaking them out, and because I really was having a hard time. I mean, there's 40 of them, and I was just having a hard time. It just seemed so arbitrary in a way to try to figure out how to put them into any kind of order. And then I started to, think about different ways to order them, but I didn't really like any of those ideas. And so I sent them to my editor, and she sent them back to me in these groups that she had made that she wouldn't even really tell me like what her like working titles were for the separate groups, but they were kind of based on similarities that she was seeing between some of the stories, but she didn't really mean for them to be broken up that way. She just was using that as sort of like an organizational tool or a way to think about putting them together. So then I took her groups and kind of use them to redistribute the stories, because at first I liked, having them, the similar ones, whatever that means, sort of together, but then I decided I wanted them sort of spread out. So then I made my own groups, but then in the process of doing that, I decided that I really liked working with these smaller units, and I think that it's also like one of the reasons that I think that I like working with smaller stories is that
Mm-hmm.
it just allows a greater degree of control, or like it lets you look at things more closely, I think,
Yeah.
than trying to look at the whole book all at once. So yeah, I don't mean for them to be, necessarily thematic or anything like that. I feel like the final organization was pretty intuitive.
Uh-huh.
But I also just really liked the idea of having this sort of pause,
Yeah.
or place that a reader could stop and rest, because even though the stories are short, I think they're pretty dense, and I don't know that it's would be good to sort of like read the
Mm-hmm.
whole book quickly. And so I liked this idea of a place where, sort of like this reoccurring bench where
Yeah.
the reader
Yeah.
could stop and sit for a minute.
Yeah. I mean, I found myself kind of when I was reading the book, stopping at those benches and kind of thinking about what I just read before I went on. So I think it is effective that way. And you don't give titles for those sections, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
which I think puts you in a position as a reader where you have to kind of think about, what is it about these stories that makes them kind of work together or belong together.
Mm-hmm.
And the only other book I can think of that does something like that is Amelia Gray has a book, Gut Shot, which also has a lot of pretty short stories in it. But I think that that's broken up in sections too, if I remember correctly. Um, and you mentioned, I mean, they're quite short, some of the stories. I think the shortest one is something like 6 or 7 lines.
Mm-hmm.
And then a lot of them, I mean, it's 40 stories and it's something like 130 pages, 131 pages. So very few of the stories are more than 2 or 3 pages. Um, do you feel like they function almost more like prose poems than stories sometimes, or was that a distinction you thought of, or not really?
Um, uh, Not really. Yeah, I think I think that I tend to think that the story form allows for a lot more than maybe it's like usually given credit for. So
Uh-huh.
I think that a story can sort of, encompass what we might call a prose poem, but I think that they're stories in my mind.
Hmm. I mean,
And
they always have a kind of narrative impulse to them,
mm-hmm,
even when they can be pretty tight, pretty compacted in some ways. But the only reason I think about prose poems is because the language seems to me very carefully chosen,
mm-hmm,
but in ways that aren't showy a lot of the time. I mean, I think there's a ton of care with each of these stories, but not in a way that makes you forget about the fact that you're listening to a story.
mm-hmm.
Um, can we talk a little bit about the book that came before this, August 9th, Fog?
Yeah,
Um,
it's yeah, Og9 Fog. Yep,
yeah, Aug9, sorry.
no problem. No, I just yeah, that's something
um,
that I've noticed a lot of people do, which I think is really interesting.
yeah, I mean, I think it's just our tendency to write out whatever is
Yeah,
there. Yeah.
definitely.
So that was a book in which you had a document from somebody else, a stranger's diary, that you found at an auction, and then you spent just a long time being attentive to it and thinking through it and capturing aspects of it. I think, is that fair to say?
Yeah, yeah,
Uh,
I think so.
yeah, and for me, I mean, part of it, that kind of attentiveness is something that comes out in the short stories as well. But can you talk a little bit about just the process for that book, and then we'll kind of circle back to the story collection.
Yeah. Well, I've said this elsewhere, but I worked on both of the books at the same time,
Yeah.
and I would sort of go back and forth between working on the stories and working on the diary. And I think that that both of them were sort of an education in playing with sentences
Hmm.
and figuring out um, what I liked and how I wanted to put sentences together. And that it ended up being, like a really long sort of meditative process working with that diary. And then I think that it finally sort of came together when I found a structure for it, the 5-season structure that it's in.
Right.
But yeah, it wasn't something that I was in a hurry to do, or maybe I was, but it just seems to take me quite a while to do everything that I do.
Yeah. Yeah, that can happen.
Yeah.
How do you know when you have a collection together? When was the moment when you thought this is a collection, or was it more that you sent it to your editor and together tried to decide if it was finished or done?
Well, I actually had sent it out in an earlier form, like 5 years ago, as a chapbook. And it was supposed to be published, but then the small press that was going to publish it went out of business, and so it ended up not being published. And then, so that sort of was disappointing. And then, but it also made me just go back to continuing to work on it and continuing to work on the stories that were already in it, but then also writing a lot of new stories. And I think that I was sort of impatient to have books out in the world. Like I had thought that I would have books out in the world sooner than this in my life. And so I was impatient for that, but at the same time, I think I was just always feeling like I wasn't ready, or that the work wasn't ready, or it wasn't done, or it wasn't a full collection yet. And actually how all of this sort of came about was with Andrew Latimer and David Winters, who were running Little Island Press in the UK. I had sent them a few stories for Egress, which was the journal that they were publishing at that time, and then they wanted to know if I had a manuscript. So I sent them, the manuscript I had at that time, which was different, a little different from what the final book ended up being, but
they went out of business as well. Yeah.
Yes, they did. But I think that I wasn't, like, at that point, I wasn't actively thinking I have a story collection that's finished and I'm going to aggressively try to find an agent for it, or find a publisher for it, or find an editor for it. I think it was more sort of like their interest, and then a lot of other things happened sort of quickly after that. And then, but at this point, it's been like 3 years since that's happened. So the book has changed and gotten better, I think, since that initial sending it to them.
Yeah, I mean, you weren't the only one who that happened to. I think Gary Lutz his collected stories were supposed to come out with them.
I know.
And so there's a lot of heartbreak, and it's too bad because I thought their taste was good. David is such a good critic as well.
I know, I agree.
Yeah. Can we just talk about the title of the book, The Dominant Animal, and about that story in particular, if you want to? But I'm curious what made you decide on that for the title of the book as a whole.
Well, that was actually another thing that I owe thanks to Andrew Latimer for. It had been my working title for the book for a while before that, and then at a certain point, I thought the title should be something else. And then when I was working on it with Andrew, he wanted that to be the title again and suggested that. So, and then I came back around to that idea, and I think that I do think it is the best title for the book.
Yeah, I think it's a good title. Can I ask what the other title you switched to would have been? Was it one of the other stories that you?
Well, the earliest form it was titled Lemons. And then The First Whiffs of Spring was the other title that I was thinking about for a minute.
Yeah, no, I think The Dominant Animal was a good choice.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Maybe we can just talk a little bit about other writers you admire, and who you feel like you are connected to, or what sort of who you look to for as peers or inspiration.
Well, I feel like I've said this a lot already, probably to an obnoxious degree, but I really feel like this book owes a lot to Diane Williams and to both to her work, and then also her work as an editor of Noon.
Which a number of the stories came out in Noon.
Yes,
Right.
they did. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. And a lot of the other writers that she publishes as well, definitely that sort of school of
Mm-hmm.
work that, can be sort of traced back to Lish, a lot of them. And, but, there's, I don't know, there's a lot of other work that I like as well.
Yeah. Well, and I think in terms of what I see in your work, I mean, I see definitely a connection to some of the things that Diane is doing, and part of that is the precision of the work. Part of that is just the concern with how people are and how that works. Yeah, and then I think about someone like Kim Chin-Kwei is someone else who I thought of, probably because she also does short pieces. Yeah.
Yeah, I love her work.
Yeah. And it's interesting to me because I think the first time I came across your work was in Noon. And I think that kind of made me think of you as someone who I should look at. And then suddenly I started seeing you everywhere. Maybe it doesn't feel that way to you, but I mean, I was teaching a class on which I call tiny fictions, which is all really short fictions, and then just ended up coming across some of your work online and really loved it and taught it in that class. So, and that's, I think, yeah, one of the great things about Diane's work and about your work and about Kim's work as well is it's still narrative, but it's also concerned with thinking about, how much or how little you need. I mean, there's not a lot of excess moments in these, if that makes any sense. Yeah, and so it partly gets very quickly to things, but that also takes, I think, a lot of precision or skill, so that you give just enough to get things across, but not too little to leave people confused.
Yeah, I mean, I think that I'm definitely going for that, and it makes me happy that you think that. I don't think that it doesn't seem like everyone feels that way, but of course, not everyone is going to feel that way. There seems to always be this desire for more information and for more interiority, whatever that means, and more character development, whatever that means.
No, I mean, I think that people, a lot of people do, a lot of writers seem to want to give you a lot in terms of those things, but I often see that as more an indication that they haven't figured out a way to say something that works precisely. If that makes any sense, because often I feel like it's sentences that are circling around something that they just can't quite touch on.
I agree with that.
Yeah, but you're definitely right. It's a kind of aesthetic decision, and it's an aesthetic decision that works really well with very short pieces. So yeah. And I mentioned kind of early on when we were talking just how much I like the language of the story and the style of the story, and there's really beautiful moments kind of all through these stories. This is one from page 32, which is from a story which is called Power Tools. His deep freeze fills with shrink-wrapped meat in a spectrum of pink. And, just the sounds there are really nice, and the repetitions are quite nice as well.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know what else there is to say about that, but I felt like you understood meat.
I appreciate that.
Yeah. So, and then in terms of just thinking about, just kind of thinking beyond this present moment, I mean, do you feel in terms of past writers, there's people who you look to or that you really admire that have been important to your development as a writer, or do you feel like it's much more focused on this kind of contemporary group of writers that you might see as connected to Lish?
No, I mean, definitely older writers as well. I read a lot of 19th century novels, as a student, and I thought for a minute that I was gonna be in school for a long time and get a degree in English, in addition to writing and do those sorts of things, but decided not to. But I mean, well, just as far as like short story writers, like Grace Paley is
Yeah,
an
she's
important
wonderful.
one, and Muriel Spark.
The Spark stories or her novels more than her stories?
All of it.
Yeah.
I feel like whenever I'm asked this question, I have to like, I just go blank and I have to like look at my shelf, and I'm resisting the urge to go and look at my shelf right now.
Yeah. I'm a huge fan of Muriel Spark, who I didn't find until maybe 15 years ago. But yeah, she's really good, I think, as well.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, and that obviously like Virginia Woolf and yeah. Right. Sorry.
No, that's okay.
I really do like freeze up and go blank, I feel like, when I'm talking.
I know. I feel like it's a terrible question in some ways. But that's the way it goes, I suppose. So
I should prepare more for it next time.
Can I ask you, I mean, animals appear in this book. There's an animal on the cover of the book. And I almost started to see, as I was reading it, a kind of, there seemed to always be a return to dogs in particular, but animals in general. And I wanted to ask about that just a little bit.
Yeah. I think it's just something that I'm just have always been interested in animals. I grew up with a lot of animals. I've always liked just watching them and how they live and what they do. And
where did you grow up?
I grew up in Iowa. Yeah, I think just in a very basic way, I just enjoy them and like to write about them. But also I think that there's something about them that is just essentially unknowable. And I think that's, a big part of my interest in them. And also I think that they're an interesting lens, with which to sort of parse these sorts of power dynamics that, seem to be at the heart of most relationships, human and animal.
Yeah. And in several of the stories, it seems like there's a kind of displaced relationship from two people going on to an animal and a person, or those. Yeah, I think you're right. It's the power dynamics or something that kind of goes through the piece as a whole, through the stories as a whole.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Well, is there anything I should ask you about that I have not asked you about? I mean, I'm sure there's more I could say, but I mean, I think that for me, the great thing about this book is that it's really precise. I think you've got a very fine sensibility in terms of the way in which you touch on the lives in it and think about them. I find it a great book to read at a time like this, kind of when they're in the middle of a pandemic, just because I reread it kind of before we talked. Because everything's just a few pages, so your level of concentration doesn't have to be massive, but it's like you can kind of get into these stories very deeply, and then take a breath again and kind of worry about the world, I suppose.
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy to hear that.
Well, maybe we can talk just a little bit about, I feel like there's a particular mood with your stories, and maybe you could just talk a little bit about what's going on there and the way in which that mood kind of ties into just how the characters understand the world.
Yeah, I think that mood is a huge part of what I'm interested in working with. And I think that the mood of not being sure, or of mystery, or of even of like horror at not really knowing what's going on around us, or not being able to trust what you see is something that is important to me when I'm working, and I think that that's something that is also important to me in your work. Like,
Hmm.
I
Yeah.
love your idea of your work being this epistemological horror.
Yeah. Yeah. I
And
mean, I feel like, I mean, just that not knowing something and just being unable to know certain things can just be way more terrifying than, than some knowing something terrible in a way. It's like the uncertainty ends up being unsettling in
yeah,
some ways. Yeah.
I agree. And it makes me think of like, I'm not really a person who watches a lot of horror movies, but I feel like whenever I do, I I'm really interested and engaged up to a certain point until the thing that the people are scared of is revealed. Like
Yeah. Yeah.
the whatever it is always ends up being so disappointing because it's something that's sort of tangible or
Yeah.
understandable in a way. And I think that that tension of, before that tension of not knowing or of sort of like infinite possibility is
Yeah.
just so much more compelling to me than finding out what it is actually that we're afraid of. And
Yeah, for
it
sure.
also makes me think of things that I've heard you say in interviews about reading other writers' work and sort of seeing where the direction that they take a story in or a novel in, and using that as a place to start from for where to write your own, or where you would
Yeah.
have diverged or
Where
gone
would it come?
differently.
Yeah,
Hmm.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an interesting thing, and I think that interest in your part, I mean, I think for me, that probably is one of the reasons why your style is the way it is, that it is so, it's careful and it's precise, but it doesn't reveal everything. And
Hmm.
so there is always this sense of, I don't know, anticipation, or this sense of something that's there that you're not quite sure, how it's going to resolve itself.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I feel like there's so few things that I feel certain about, or that I, feel certain in my knowledge of, or
Yeah.
have an opinion about even. And I think it just seems like I don't know, it seems like a lot of people really want to be sure
Yeah.
of themselves or of things in general and to know the answers, but I think that I've just always been more interested in the questions, maybe.
Yeah, no, I'm in the same place. And I do think, I mean, there is this funny thing with things like social media where you get a sense of people just asserting their certainty or trying to create their certainty by just saying
Hmm.
insane things sometimes.
Hmm. Yeah.
And that sense of kind of stepping back just a little bit, and observing almost as much as anything is something that
Hmm.
seems very much more writerly to me.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and then I think as well. I mean, it suggests a kind of greater curiosity. Um, and then I really think that there's these two kind of large um, uh, tendencies in writing, and one is this notion of writing as information or as something that has to be conveyed, and the other is writing as an experience. Um,
Hmm.
and that experience as being something that maybe can't be kind of boiled down to information. And I really see your work and my work and the work of most writers I admire is so much more on that side.
Hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I don't think I have anything else that I feel like you should ask about the stories, but
Okay. um,
um,
do you have dogs now? Can I just ask that?
I don't.
Okay.
I had a dog for a long time, and she died recently. So,
Hmm. Yeah.
but yeah,
I'm s-
I had her. I had her for 15 years. So,
uh Wow. Yeah, I
mhm.
had a dog for around the same time, and yeah, it's hard to kind of figure out where to go after that.
Yeah, it is,
Yeah.
and it's really strange how much of an effect I feel like it had on my writing life or my working life, just because uh, I got her like around the time that I was first starting to try to, really work and stay at home and work. And so she sort of kept me at home, and, it was easier to stay home when she was there. And then, she was pretty much the constant of my writing of this book, of both of my books. Whenever I would be working, she would be there.
Yeah.
So that was a really, a strange and kind of terrible adjustment to have to make. That.
Yeah. No, for sure. Yeah. Well, before we started talking, you and I were talking. We have never actually met in person before.
No.
And obviously, we're not going to be doing that in the next few weeks anyway.
No.
But I do hope we get to meet sometime in person. We had originally planned to do this event at Skylight and talk about your book and launch it into the world. But hopefully there'll be other times for that.
Yeah, I hope so. Also.
Yeah. Okay, it's really great to talk to you, Kathryn. And if you didn't catch it, the name of the book is The Dominant Animal by Kathryn Scanlan, and I highly recommend it.
Thanks so much, Brian.
Thank you for listening to the Skylight Books podcast series. Please don't forget to visit our website at skylightbooks.com and make sure to follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Also, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast for more author talks and bookseller conversations. You can find us on Podbean, iTunes, and Spotify. Stay safe and healthy, and we hope to see you back in our store soon.
I see